happy to continue to do it on Sunday evenings. We've got people listening on Facebook Live and the school, the SKOOL, that a lot of people have tuned into. Thanks for doing that. What it is, it's the enlarged lessons instead of getting the short little reels that people really like, frankly. You get the broader version that has everything on it, topic by topic. So you might want to check that out. People listening on YouTube Live. So, yeah, nice to have you on board today. We'll give it just a couple of minutes before we jump into your questions that you had this week. That's what we do on Sunday nights. I try to take some of the questions from the week and take a deeper dive into those and try to answer a few of those questions for you. I've been on vacation the last week. Still got a few days to go, although I'll probably check in with the orchard in the morning and just kind of get things lined out for a few more days. But I've been able to travel. I've spent some time down in Mexico and spent some time with my dad the last few days. That's been nice. My dad has dementia and is getting older, and so I was able to spend some time with him. Did some camping and some mountain climbing. I posted a couple pictures of that. I hope you enjoyed that. We're fortunate to live here in Washington State. We have the Cascade Range that runs all the way from Canada all the way down through California, and it's a volcanic range that gets a lot of snow in the wintertime, and so the snow, that's our snowpack, determines how much irrigation water that we have. We actually farm over here on the desert side versus western Washington, which is what you would see in those pictures, all trees and high mountains and just beautiful, beautiful country. Well, we get the benefit of the water melting out of that snowpack over on the east side in the desert, and that's how we irrigate our crops, and that's how over the last 150 years we've transitioned this beautiful, fertile volcanic soil into some of the best farm ground in the entire world. So it's really a unique situation. So yeah, did some mountain climbing and did some fishing with some people that I love, and going to do a little more fishing before the week's over. So enjoying just a little bit of downtime. We are in millimeter thinning right now. I'm sure those went on last week. We talked about those last week, and I'm sure those went on last week. And so far, we've had just perfect weather for thinning. When you do those pedal fall sprays and those millimeter sprays, you don't want real dramatic hot temperatures, and you don't want cool temperatures either. That makes it unpredictable. We've had real steady 75, 80-degree temperatures, and so I expect when I go take a look tomorrow, we're going to see really good results from that. The theme that we pose this week is, what are your greatest struggles? And we've taken note of some of those. An awful lot of them are repeats. In other words, it's really kind of formed a pattern for me, kind of some of the things to focus on. And I think we've even started a place in the school for frequently asked questions, because a lot of these struggles are struggles that we all share and that we're all going through together. And I don't claim to have all the answers. I do appreciate when people chime in on the page with things that have worked for them and how they've handled some of these struggles. It is the Tree Fruit Collective, so it shouldn't just be just me. I encourage participation and sharing with one another. And so as we go through some of these, if you have something you can share, please chime in on the page and share that with us, because we're all still learning. I'm still learning. I've been doing this all my life, and when I quit learning, it's going to be time to hang it up. But I'm still having a good time and still learning. So Kyle's on board. Welcome, Kyle, from Michigan. Nice to have you on board tonight. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. The first question comes from Casey. Casey says, I'm deciding if I should replant and what to replant. Boy, this is the first time that we haven't done any big plantings in, gosh, as long as I can remember. It just hasn't been we've been planting the last 3 or 4 years real solidly. And just because of the climate and the market that we've had, we personally aren't doing any replanting this year. Did do a lot of grafting. I think that makes a lot of sense in situations. But what to replant? Boy, if I was going to replant right now, I would certainly choose something that is consistent and reliable and that's fit for your area. One of the patterns, incidentally, that we've really seen come through on these struggles that I didn't realize is a bigger problem as it is alternating. That seems to be a huge problem. So I would get an apple that doesn't alternate, doesn't tend to alternate. I would get a grower-friendly apple. One of my favorite apples that we have here in Washington State is the Cosmic Crisp. Not only do I think it's the best apple ever, a good eating apple, you can cut it and it doesn't discolor. It's a very grower-friendly apple. I mean, You can easily produce 100 and 120 bins to the acre if you have a good formalized system with that apple. So when I'm thinking about what to replant, I don't want something that alternates. I want something that's grower friendly, and I would try to find some sort of a niche. Here we have a couple very special, uh, geo geographical areas with the right elevation, the right temperatures, where you can really grow good pears. I was raised up in White Salmon, and it's just the right elevation up in the mountains where you can grow pears really well. Same thing over in Wenatchee and Kashmir. That's great country for growing pears. So maybe it's a niche where you're a real special region. Maybe you're up above about 1,800 feet, and you can really grow Honeycrisp. I'd focus on Honeycrisp. You can't really grow Honeycrisp very effectively down in the lower areas. They don't color up as well. They're not as pretty. So I would what to replant? Boy, that's a loaded question. I would consider all those things that I listed, and probably many more. What's your irrigation source? What are you good at? Really ask yourself and be realistic about what it is that you're good at growing, and consider all those things, and then hopefully you'll be able to come up with what it is that you're to replant. The next thing is Paul Rule says fruit set is his main concern. Well, we've been talking about fruit set quite a little bit. And there's a couple things that go along with fruit set. Is the first thing is you want to have strong buds. If you don't have a good nutrition plan and strong buds, you will struggle with flowers the next year. You'll struggle with return blooms. So the first thing I would do is I would check my nutrition program. I would check if the block has a history of alternation. That could be an issue. The biggest factor is pollinizers, and making sure you get out there and thin early. I can't say it enough and say it clearly enough. It's so important if you're a commercial grower to get out there early with those lime sulfurs and get as many flowers off of those trees as you possibly can. That's very very important. So if fruit set is the main concern, I would take a look at all of those things. Bud density. What's your bud density look like? Sometimes I'll go out and look at a block, and I just don't have the density of buds in that block that I'm looking for. So you want to take a look at your nutrition program and make sure that you're producing lots of new buds. Take a look at your pruning. Make sure that you're leaving renewal wood in there, new buds for the next year. You have to think about all these things. You want to think about the pollinizer. Mildew. Think about mildew. If you get mildew into a block and you have a mildew outbreak, it will affect bud density. So all of those things. If you're not getting good fruit set, that's a real issue. Check your pollinizers. Make sure you have pollinizers in there. See, Stephanie's on board. Welcome. And hard to please guy. Welcome, hard to please guy. And let's see. Some guy 12-8 said hi. Hi there on YouTube. Nice to have you on board tonight. Sounds like we have a pretty good group tonight. Joseph Savastano says, we messed up this spring in New Jersey, wiped out most of the apple crop. I have 5,000 trees approximately, and do not even think of frost and freeze protection. I'm now thinking about some sort of protection going forward to minimize crop damage in the future. I appreciate your advice. Boy, that's tough. It's hard to lose a crop to frost. I've lost a lot of crops to frost over the years. The good news is we have new technologies that have come along that have really helped us with frost. I remember 20, 30 years ago out lighting smudge pots and working all night, and trust me, it used to be a lot harder. We did everything in the book. We used to run over tree sprinklers that would absolutely freeze the trees, and I don't know if you've seen that, but it's very effective if you have the water to do it. It insulates the buds. I've done all of the above, but if you have 5,000 trees, that's really tough. Maybe you could put some sort of under tree irrigation system. Maybe there's a way that you could get a system to where you cover each tree. Boy, I would sure figure something out. One thing I do know about frost protection is you get better at it. So in other words, as we go along, we learn where the cold spots are, and we learn which borders causes trouble. We learn where the drift comes in from the cold air, and we compensate for those things. We might put border heat on the outsides. Might put a new wind machine. We might if we have a drainage issue, we might take out a swath of trees that gives us an avenue for the cold air to drain. When you're thinking of cold air, you should think of it just like a river. It'll flow exactly like water. So as you envision your land and as the cold air is going to move, you should envision that just as if it was water flowing like a river, and kind of trace that. And it could be that if you remove some trees and create a low spot in the draw, it'll naturally give that cold air a place to go. Frost protection, that's a tough one, but it must be addressed, and I would just keep working on it. Larry says his biggest challenge is getting the trees to fruit. All the trees from the local stores have upright branches, and there's no instructions to tell you that fruit comes on horizontal branches. Yeah, the fruit will grow on upright branches. It will, but it'll grow a lot more fruit if you pull those branches down flat. And it'll also take the vigor out of the limb and stop it from growing. If you leave it upright, it's going to want to just continue on growing. That's the nature of a tree is it wants to grow up towards the sun, and it'll want to keep growing. But as soon as you pull that limb down flat, it'll settle that down and it'll bring it into its own for fruiting. So I would encourage you to do that. What we like about that when we pull them flat is we get little dards that grow up off the top of those, and we can treat those almost like a wine grape plant that has spurs on it. We'll fruit those and we'll leave fruiting spurs and resting spurs. It's really a great system. But if you just have a backyard tree, if you can just go out there with some string or some tape and just pull the limbs down, they don't have to be completely flat, but just pull the limbs down and they'll crop for you better. And then at pruning time, you can come back in and make cuts on those. It'll kind of stiffen those up so that you don't need a wire to hold them. They'll kind of hold themselves. It'll sturdy them up a little bit. We'll talk about that a little more later. Suhail Khan and Shah Musamil says their greatest struggle is alternate bearing. We've been talking about alternate bearing a lot lately, and it's came up, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 times as we posed the question this week of greatest struggle. I really didn't realize how big an issue it is. Number one, thin early. Uh, Sometimes alternate bearing will be inherent in a tree. In other words, I've had alternate bearing in a block and I've grafted the block over to something new and it still has alternate bearing. It's inherent in the rootstock and the scion, and it's always going to alternate bear. Um, but some of it I think is preventable, even in a backyard situation, but especially in a commercial situation. It's just so important that you thin early, that you blossom thin early, that you get that fruit off there early. If you don't, the longer you delay that, the longer you push that back, the greater your chances of not getting a good return the next year. I hope that makes sense. So in effect, it can cause alternate bearing on you. Now, the real form of alternate bearing is the nature of a tree to where it will alternate bear, and we see this in certain varieties more than others. We see it in Fuji's have a real tendency to alternate bear. Honeycrisp have a tendency to alternate bear. Even galas, I've even seen galas have a tendency to want to alternate bear. Not necessarily in that order, but trees and varieties more than others will alternate bear on you. So in some cases, it's just you have a very strong tree. One thing that you can check is you can check the root to see if it is scion rooted. In other words, if you're getting roots where that graft union is, if you're getting roots coming off of there, they call that scion rooting. And you'll grow new roots there, and that tree will get wound up and it'll get too strong. And those trees will have a tendency to alternate bear on you. You'll see them out in a block. They'll have a crop one year, they won't have a crop next year. What can you do about that? You can pull the dirt away from it. So it's labor intensive, but you can do it. And you can chop those roots off and get that tree to settle back down. A lot of times, just a very over vigorous tree. And in some situations where you just have a real over vigorous tree and a block wants to alternate on you, we do a lot of girdling. I don't know, we probably girdled 50, 60,000 trees this year. It's real, it's something that we do. I'm going to get comments that say, oh, girdling doesn't work. It doesn't stop alternate bearing. That's true. It doesn't stop alternate bearing. But what it does do, coupled with thinning early and good nutrition in your buds and all of the other things that we've discussed, coupled with all those other things, what it does is it reduces the amount of alternate bearing. In other words, you might have 80 bins per acre in your on year, and in your off year, you might have 50 bins per acre. It kind of levels that out for you rather than having these drastic swings of of 80 or 90 bins per acre one year, and 10 bin, it's not even worth picking the next year because it doesn't have anything on it. It can help you to stop those wild swings and get it evened out a little more. So I would definitely address the problem. And I think the goal should be to achieve a realistic balance from one year to the next. But you can have an impact on alternate bearing, and I would encourage you to do that. Max Tabaz says his greatest struggle. Let's see. Okay, thank you, Annie. Ryan has joined us. Skip has joined us. Furtis Ahmad has joined us. Shah Muzamil, welcome. It's nice to have you on board tonight. Speaking of Max, I think this is Max's question. Greatest struggle is irrigation. That's a loaded one. I don't really know a lot about your irrigation over here. We have the luxury of wells in some cases, great water source from wells. Other cases, we get water from the Yakima River. I talked to you about that snowpack, that melt from that snowpack. We'll pull water out of the Yakima River. We even get water out of the mighty Columbia River. But we are in a drought year this year, so I understand how important irrigation is. Fact is, I think last week I said irrigation is your most important input. Of all the inputs that you have control over, none is greater than irrigation. So at the beginning of the year, there's some things that I like to do. I like to get out there and unplug all the drip lines, open up the ends of them, get them all flushed out, get them all unplugged. So you're starting out with nice clean drip line, plug sprinklers. Boy, you just cannot have plug sprinklers, not even for one single irrigation set. There has to be someone on a four-wheeler running up and down those rows, looking at those sprinklers, unplugging sprinklers. My pet peeve is something that I call spinners. You'll go out there and you'll have a nice sprinkler working its pattern, and then right next to it you'll have a little sprinkler that's spinning round and round in circles, and the irrigator leaves them because, well, it's throwing water out. It looks like it's doing something even though it don't have the same pattern, so he just leaves those in there. It won't give you a good irrigation set. It won't get out to the edge of the pattern. You want to get those spinners replaced and get them out of there. So starting out, making sure that your system is working good, number one, that's very important. But also that you're running good pressures. You want to make sure that you have good water pressures. And yeah, irrigation is the most important thing that you can do all year. Managing those sets, that's something that I don't really delegate to anyone, is that management of how much irrigation we're going to put on each week. That is very important. That needs to be weighed against the evapotranspiration that is predicted for that week, and what your sprinkler output is. And that needs to be figured out and then applied every single week to keep those soils at 80% of soil moisture capacity. So we'll be talking about irrigation more and more over the course of the next couple months. Sanjeev Sharma says, growth issue in dwarf rootstocks. Boy, something that I've seen over and over again, and I've done it myself over and over again. In fact, the matter is I'm struggling with it right now, is dwarf rootstocks are wonderful. I love dwarf rootstocks. If you get them planted right in the right soil, if you get the right rootstock, you can get those things up to the top wire in the third year and settle that tree down, and it should just be perfect. You can get in a rhythm by the fourth or fifth leaf, producing 100 bins per acre, and life is good, and everything works the way it wants to. But sometimes we have a tendency, because let's face it, trees are very, very expensive. And so we have a tendency, instead of planting those bud nines, a foot and a half apart or 2 feet apart, we might stretch that out to 3 feet, or 3.5 feet, way too far. Unrealistic amount of space for that tree to fill its space. And so you just struggle to get it to the top wire, and you struggle to fill your space. And so you struggle cost-wise. You have all this wasted acreage because you put a dwarfing rootstock for the planting that you have. I shared that I have a system right now that is going into the fifth leaf, should be in full production. All the Geneva 41s and the Geneva 11s and the 969s and the 890s that we planted all around it have already reached the top wire and in full production. And this year I'm having to go back into those trees. And this is my suggestion for you, is I'm going to go back into those trees, those bud nines, and I'm going to slick off every single limb all the way up the entire tree. I've already done that. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a dominant sucker up above the graft union. We found a lot of those. In some cases, on a slow tree like that with a dwarfing rootstock, it'll throw you a strong sucker. And so we've gone to the strong sucker and we've cut those trees off and we've started over again. And as that strong sucker grows up to the top wire, I'm going to keep pinching and channeling growth all the way up that tree, putting all the growth into the central leader of that tree for the next 3 months. And I'm going to fertilize them twice a week and I'm going to drive that tree up to the top wire. Once I get the tree up to the top wire, I know I can fill the space on the wire with the limbs. So I'm going through that right now. It's a result of making a bad decision early on, and those dwarfing rootstocks, depending on your soil, you want to plant those close together accordingly to be realistic about being able to fill that space by the fifth or the sixth leaf. A question here from Kyle. Kyle said, "We also use root pruning." Yeah, root. I'm glad you mentioned that, Kyle. I've been wanting to talk about that. I saw a video on your page the other day. I appreciate that. We have a little different type of root pruner that you have. I like the one that you had. It looks like it does both sides at one time. Ours is more like kind of a blade that goes down into the soil and goes along one side and cuts it off. But yes, thanks for bringing that up. Another thing that you can do for alternate bearing and to settle those trees down is root pruning. And thanks, Kyle. I'll post something about that here in the next couple of days. So thanks for bringing that up. Let's see. Yeah, Nikki says his biggest issue is frost damage and drought. We've been talking about that. Frost damage, really identify, if you're going to do frost control, make sure you identify what your inversion is. I think over the years, before we got technology, farmers, including myself, lost a lot of crops because they turned wind machines on and they didn't know what their inversion was. If you don't have an inversion, in other words, if you don't have a warm layer of air laying above that cold air that's on the bottom freezing your buds, the idea of the wind machine goes round, and it goes around, it pushes out the cold air and the warm air drops down. Well, if you don't have a layer of warm air to drop down, you can do more damage to your trees as if you hadn't even started a wind machine. So know what your inversion is. Know what your wet bulb temperature is. We've talked about this quite a bit. If you get a big spread between your ambient temperature and your wet bulb temperature, you can be waiting for the temperature to drop all night long, and maybe you've already froze out because there's a 7-degree spread between the wet bulb and the ambient. And the wet bulb temperature, it will freeze your trees in a heartbeat. Drought, again, we're also experiencing drought. Some of the things, we've got a lot of people joining. Thank you, honey. Eli's joined us. Terry, nice to have you on board, Terry. Great participant. John Becker, Skip, Pritish Dogra, Ellie, it's nice to have you on board. Thanks for joining us tonight. Yeah, we're going through a drought too. A drought makes it really hard. We're having to make some really tough decisions right now. Luckily, we have different irrigation zones throughout our growing area, but there's a couple that we're going to be running off of 40% of our natural irrigation that we're allotted. And so that's not a lot. So we're going to have to get really creative. So, a lot of irrigation with drip lines. I love to run under trees to get out to those roots, but probably going to be doing a lot more irrigation through only the drip lines and on those ranches. We've gone to foggers. We've moved away from big R20s and big Nelson rotators that put out a lot of water for cooling. We've tried to move away from that. We've gone to little R10s, little mini micro sprinklers, and we're really moving towards foggers. Most of our new blocks have fogger systems in them, but in some cases we're not even going to have enough water to run foggers, and so we're going to have to take a hard look at blocks that aren't as susceptible to the heat and the hot sun, and in some cases we're going to be doing parka and surround on blocks that we normally would be cooling. So we'll be making some of those decisions. Also shade cloth. Maybe I'll take some pictures here in the coming days as we begin deploying shade cloth. I am a big believer on shade cloth, on colored varieties. There's a whole science that goes along with that I've learned over the years. I used to deploy those early in the season. I don't do that anymore. I deploy them as late as I possibly can, and then in a lot of cases, as soon as I can, when I'm out of that real sunburn period, I'll roll them back up, so I'll get color in Honeycrisp or whatever it is during that timing. So we'll talk about that a lot later. Shade cloth is another thing we're going to use for drought. But if you have suggestions for drought, please share those with us. I know we have growers in Australia and New Zealand and Israel that probably have a whole lot more experience with that sort of thing than we do. We're just kind of confronting that as we kind of come into some of this climate change. Demir is asking about the challenges of transitioning from conventional to organic fruit growing, especially dealing with repeated spring frost, drainage and irrigation for frost protection, unexpected pest pressure, that's a good point, in organic production, and the long-term cost and difficulty of replanting with resistant varieties. Well, Demir, I think the first thing that you have to do if you're going to consider transitioning a block from organic, and we do this all the time, frankly. We'll grow up a block. We really like to grow up a block for 3 years, even when we plant a new block. We'll automatically put that block into conventional so that we have tools at our disposal to get those trees up and grown and out of the ground. So that's the first thing. I would definitely, you get 3 years, conventional. I would definitely take advantage of that and get those trees up. And for the first 3 years, all the way up till that first harvest, right? You push it right up until that harvest date, so you can get into the organic program a year earlier. You want to time that right. But we will bring blocks into the organic program. Sometimes the pest pressure gets too high, and we've even had to pull blocks out of the organic program because we just can't keep up with organic methods. But we have become good at growing organic. A large part of what we do is organic blocks, and but it can be difficult. It probably costs 30% more for the input in an organic block by the time you buy compost and manure, and you pay a higher cost for the limited amount of pesticides you're able to use that are Omni approved. There's a lot of inspections that go along with organic. There's a cost to that, and the administration of that. So if it's going to cost you 30% more, you're going to want to make sure that you're going to get paid 30% more on the back end. Generally speaking, organics have been successful, and they can be successful. I would just say you want to be realistic about the area that you're choosing. If you're growing in the midst of neighbors that aren't very good with their integrated pest control programs, you might want to consider a different area. Sometimes it's best if you're kind of isolated and off to yourself, to where you can control what it is that you're doing. That's what I would say. Organic. I'm a fan of organic. We do a lot of it. Oh, Kyle was talking about he sees some European wind machines with heaters built in. Looks worth exploring. That sounds real interesting. That might be interesting too for the person that was talking about his 5,000 trees, some small version of that. That's real interesting. I'm going to be taking a look at that myself. So, Steve Prelli had a question. He says he started to use Retain last year on apples and he liked how it worked. What else can I do to increase quality, color, and size? Boy, that's a loaded question. Let's start with Retain. Been using Retain a long time. Used to use Retain a lot on Red Delicious because all we had was Red Delicious, and you had to control that harvest. And so I have used a lot of Retain. It will affect color. So as you're thinking about using Retain, to kind of whether you're going to hold off the harvest, you want to grow bigger fruit, and whatever your reasoning is, consider that. It can affect fruit color. Also, it's expensive. Retain costs a lot of money, so you want to ask yourself if you really have that built into your budget. I like Retain on cherries. There's some varieties on some of the older roots, the old Mazart rootstocks, Chelan, different varieties that maybe don't return bloom as well. Talking cherries here. And so I like to use Retain on those blocks. I think we did that a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure the timing of that, but I like to do Retain once a year on those, and it'll help with return bloom. I've had a real successful program of wildfire galas. Wildfire galas, they tend to be a soft apple, but they're early and they're beautiful. And so I've been able to do a half rate of Retain on those, and kind of got that down to a science of growing a big, beautiful wildfire gala that's hard and crisp and still gets good color with a half a rate of Retain. But I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a fan of Harvista. I've been using Harvista now for about the last 10 years. It's cheaper than Retain, and really holds fruit well in storage. It's a wonderful tool for timing out your harvest. If you have, let's say you have 500 acres of galas, just as an example, and you got to harvest that within a 3 week window. How are you going to get all those picked at the same time? Well, you can use a product like retain for one, but I really like Harvesta to stage out that harvest, to maybe delay some of the blocks until later so you can kind of start and work your way through those blocks. So I love Harvesta. It'll also buy you a little time to let that fruit grow a little bit. It will have an effect on color. I've seen, I've been using it for 10 years, probably 2 out of the 10 years, I've seen it impact color. And so you want to be aware of that. What else can you do? You can get your mylar down as quick as you can. You want to get your mylar down. Summer prune if you need to. We've kind of gone to leaf blowers here. We got a leaf blower last year and wanting to do more with that this year. But if you can run a leaf blower down through those rows, you can't do that in the real peacock season. But as we start moving closer towards fall, when we get about to Fuji's, we can start using a leaf blower and blow off those leaves, and you get just that real brilliant color. Not only nice color, but it allows you to eliminate some of those second and third picks. You can pick everything at one time. So yeah, shade cloth. I'm a fan of shade cloth. I like using shade cloth. Yeah, what else? What else can you do? Irrigation inputs, we talked about that. Those are very important, probably the most important thing. Manage and control those irrigation inputs for quality. That's very important. We're in thinning right now. We're going to go into hand thinning here when I get back off vacation. We're going to go make some decisions and get started. Hand thinning is probably the most important thing that you can do manually or culturally for quality fruit and fruit size. In other words, it's an opportunity while you're in there to thin off the bad fruit that's marked or that's kind of ugly, and leave the biggest and the best. Right? We always say leave the biggest and the best. But also space those out appropriately so that that apple is going to grow to its correct size for whatever it is you're looking for that apple, and it's going to have good color all the way around it. So that's some suggestions I would do. Try Harvesta. It's a great product to work with. Thin early and make sure that you're really spacing those things out so you get good color. Consider Mylar. That's a reflective paper that you can put down in the bottom of the row and it reflects color back up. Irrigation sets, very, very important. Yeah, those are some of the things that I would try. What do we got here? Abo Spot is on board. Welcome. Eli, Les, Perry Smith, Les Bowen, Furtis Ahmad Sufi, welcome. It's nice to have you on board tonight. Let's see, what do we got here? Frankie Lopez Sapero says, what rootstock did you use for your backyard trees, Rob? Yeah, I've been sharing with you my backyard trees over here. My rootstocks are everything that I have on the wire over here. The apples are all on all on Geneva rootstock. I like Geneva rootstocks. I think they're all on Geneva 11 and Geneva 41. And the cherries are all on Gisela rootstocks that are on the wire over here. They're all on Gisela 6 and Gisela 12. The pears that I have over here, those are Old Home Farm 87, I believe. That's just an old standard rootstock. I have some other trees on the other side of the yard that I'm going to show you here in the future. We'll talk about how to train those. That's probably more along the lines of what most of you would have in your backyard. Those are on those. I just have a post by those to support those, just so they'll grow real strong. But they probably don't need a support system. Some of those are on M26. I think there's some 337s over there, and maybe some M9s, a little bit bigger rootstock, and probably capable of holding up their own weight. So that's what I have in my backyard. Share with me what it is that you have in your backyard. Oh, where do we get these type of trees? That was his second question. A lot of nurseries here in the Pacific Northwest that sell these trees. Cameron Nurseries is one I work with. Stark Brothers Nurseries is a good nursery. Columbia Basin Nursery is a great nursery. Van Well Nursery, we get a lot of trees from them. Those are a good place to get these good, real nice feathered trees that you really want to get when you're growing fruit trees. Those are some of the nurseries. I'm sure I've missed some. I don't mean to do that. One thing I want to recommend to you tonight as we close, if we don't have any more questions, if you're not already getting the Good Fruit Grower magazine, I would get that. A lot of these questions about equipment, where to get equipment, where to buy stakes, and where to buy supplies, and frankly, nurseries, you can find all of those in Good Fruit Grower. And they have some wonderful articles. The Prosser Research Center from Washington State University is just about 10 miles from my house. I can see it across the valley from where I live right now. and they just do a lot of wonderful research for tree fruit. I'm friends and associates with a lot of the professors over there and the people that are working on different projects. Some of them probably listening tonight. They do a lot of great work, and you'll be able to read about that in the Good Fruit Grower magazine. So if you don't get the Good Fruit Grower magazine, I think if you're a grower and you write into them, they'll send you that for free. I've been a subscriber now for over 40 years of that magazine, and I think even recently they began to put that out in Spanish too. So it's in English and in Spanish. So I know most of you probably get the Good Fruit Grower, but if you don't, that's my recommendation to you tonight. That if you're a tree fruit person, definitely you should be getting the Good Fruit Grower magazine. So look into that. That's all I have. Barnum, do we have any other questions here? Oh, we do have some questions here. Oh my goodness. Kyle says, "What would you expect with real cool temperatures with Kings damaged by frost?" Oh boy, boy, I hope they get through it, Kyle. The biggest thing I would expect is marked fruit. We had a block last year of Honeycrisp that made it through the frost season. I saw you guys had some cold temperatures there about a week and a half ago. Made it through the cold season. Grew well. We got those things all the way up into June, and then we started seeing some real bad marking on them. And I think we had 30 acres of Cosmic Crisp we didn't even pick because this very same thing happened to us last year. So be on the lookout for marking. You may see some of that. Not sure what the variety is there, but yeah, I'd be on the lookout for marking. If you can be aware of it and get out ahead of it, could be that you can thin some of that off. You get an opportunity. Eric Wright says, "Should I be clipping the aboard?" I would let them abort. Yeah, they'll abort. If you've well, that's assuming that you've done lime sulfurs and you've done the things that we've talked to, and the calyx is not closing up, and they're obviously going to abort. By the way, thanks for the responding to the picture A and B, which fruit is going to set. I will reference you back to that picture. Make sure that those queens are queens that are going to abort. In other words, they're not fertilized and they're not closing up. If that's the case, they'll drop. You don't need to worry about it. If they're beginning to close up, like they've said, yeah, you want to get in there and pinch those off. That's the best way to do that. The quicker you can get those off, the better. Kevin says, "Knowing when to fertilize what? How do I know whether I should fertilize with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients, etc.? Do I have to send soil and leaf sample? That isn't a big enough representation of the entire orchard to use visual cues." This is a great question. I like to sample every other, at least a representative block every other year. So at least every other year, a block is getting sampled. In the wintertime, I like to sit down and look at those soil samples and go over them. Towards the end of the season in the autumn, I like to pull leaf samples. Before trees begin to pull their reserves back down to the root system, you want to get in there and get a leaf sample so that you're really looking at those. And then, yeah, you want to analyze that soil sample. And based on that soil sample, that's when I like to put down my spring fertilizer. And you can put that down anytime during the dormant season. We normally get started on those in February, always beginning with the organics first because we want to break down that material first. How do I know when to fertilize with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients? Well, metals and nutrients and anything that's going to go on as a foliar spray, your biggest gun is during the pink spray and on up until the fruit begins to form about now. But pink spray is very important during that timing to get those foliar sprays on. That's when I like to do those. I don't know why. I like to do metals in the fall. If you're going to do iron or magnesium or any sort of metal, I always like to apply those as a foliar later on in the year. I think it's because I have this idea that it'll draw those metals back down to the root system when the tree pulls its reserves down. I'm not sure about the science of that. I always do metals in the fall. My mix that has, my mix that I do in the spring right now, I want to make sure that my nitrogen is in there. Maybe not all my nitrogen, but I want to have a good shot of nitrogen in there. I want to have my P in there, and I want to have some K. That's going to get those roots to grow and get them flushing. So I like to have N, P, K. Based on what my pH is, I may have sulfur in there to drive down the pH or some light product to bring it to break down the soil. It could be calcium or whatever. My mix that I do, I'll do that first in February, March. That's the first thing that I'll do. After that, I will go to fertigation. That's what I'm doing now. We're into fertigation right now. And that's any tree that I'm trying to grow to the top wire. I'm going to be going on with the same sort of mix based on my soil samples. Those are really expensive. So as I've mentioned before, I'll do that 2 or 3 or 4 times depending on the block, and then I'm going to go to my nitrogen source. And it's just like having your foot on the gas. From then on out until summer solstice, I'm just going to use end products. It could be UN32, it could be Can 17. Pick your favorite end mix for your area, and I would just use N, preferably through the fertigation. But you can band it on through a weed sprayer, however you want. The most important thing is consistency. If you're trying to grow a tree to the top wire, you should be pushing those things twice a week. And just be consistent and keep the water on and just keep pushing those things. So if you ever have a soil sample that you want me to look at, send those over there, post them. I'll take a 5-minute look at them and tell you what I think. Be happy to do that for you. But that's what I would do. I would address the what I call the dry mix in the dormant in February. Then I would go to fertigation in the pink. I would make sure and get those foliars on, and I would make sure and get foliar metals on later, closer towards the fall. Do I need to send in soil and leaf samples? I would highly recommend it. You want to know what's going on with your soil, and now more and more with a lot of the audits and inspections we have with Global Gap and regenerative. We're part of the regenerative program, and some of our great programs that we have that are regenerative in nature. They really want to see that you've looked at a soil sample and you're amending your soil to what your soil needs rather than just going out there and throwing fertilizer on. So that's becoming more and more important just for sustainable farming purposes. Fertus Ahmad Sufi says, can we apply nutrition through drip in the first year of plantation M9? Not only can you, but you should. Yeah, just pour it to them, Fertus. Like I say, a couple of times a week. Take a soil sample of what those need. If you don't have a soil sample, if it's a new tree, it sounds like it is. Yeah, you'll want to pull a soil sample, what's in your soil. I even put down compost. When I do a new planting, I'll put down 5 tons per acre of compost. And yes, I would absolutely be going through the drip twice a week through the growing period on those. Very important. We got a lot of questions here tonight, didn't we? Wes Hart, please do a video on how to grow clipping from apples. I read this the other day. I don't know how to do clipping from apples, but I know people that do. Maybe that's something we'll talk to Chris about. Chris Pirelli, I started using Retain. Just talked about that. Just did that question. So, hard to please guy. What activity is best for mangoes? Do you have an experience in a kind? I don't have any experience in mangoes. I love mangoes. My wife's from the Philippines, so I love eating mangoes. I'm sorry, I don't have any experience in mangoes. If somebody knows what acidity is best for mangoes, could you chime in on that? My guess is that it likes a lower pH around a 5. I'm just guessing on that, but I'm guessing it likes an acidic soil. But somebody please correct me on that. Christo for Cooey, about how many times are you waiting per week? Watering per week. That's a good question. It depends on the soil type. Usually this time of year, I'm going to water twice per week. I'm going to do a big set, Tuesday. I'm going to do a big set on Thursday. Generally twice a week. That could vary depending on if I have clay soils, if I have hard pan, if I have any soil that that causes that water to sit on the surface and just run off. Then I'm going to want to do shorter sets. That could be very acidic, salty soils. I've had that problem. But generally, we have good sandy, loamy soils, generally speaking, throughout the Yakima Valley here. And I like to do, in the on season, maybe a couple 12-hour sets per week during the real hot part of the year. Yeah, and maybe less on the drip. As we get closer to harvest, we'll pulse the drip line to increase fruit size. And there's some real neat tricks that we'll talk about later on then on how to pulse that water to get results that you need. But generally, I like to water a couple of times a week. But it could be a lot more than that if I'm having to spoon feed blocks for one reason or another. What about your grass for fumigation? Marty Van Bree. I've talked about this a little bit before. I had a block one time of Honeycrisp, but we were contemplating pulling that block out. We didn't fumigate that block when it was planted. That was before I had gotten to that block, to the company. and it hadn't been fumigated. They were considering pulling that block out, and I said, "Hey, give me a year with that block, please. Let me just try to grow those through that," which is almost impossible with nematodes. And again, it hadn't been fumigated. I went in and planted a combination of mustard and arugula. And the idea is that the arugula is sweet and it draws in the nematodes, and the mustard, when the mustard grows up and it begins to flower, it'll shoot off fine little root hairs down at the root zone. That's the perfect time to cut those off, and just as soon as you cut them off, rotivate them under the ground. And when you do that, it gases off and creates a natural fumigant that just happens to kill nematodes. So we did that. We did that for like 4 years in a row, and grew those trees to the top wire, and it was a real success story. So if you already have trees planted, or if you're going to plant a block next year and you don't want to fumigate, or even if you just want to add some great organic matter to the soil, I would strongly recommend that. It's just a good blend of arugula and mustard, and till that under when it flowers off, and that will provide a great source of organic matter, and it will have the great benefit of killing nematodes and preparing that soil. Johan says, how do you control aphids and spotted wing Drosophila in organic cherries? I think we talked about this question last week. We use a product called Sea Light. I like to use that. Never use the full rate of that product. I think the full rate of that product is 50 pounds. If you use too much of that product, it'll tend to inhibit photosynthesis, and it'll cause you a lot of problems. I've done that before. So you want to use a lower rate of that, probably 20 to 25 pounds, and it's very effective for aphids and spotted wing Drosophila. You know, the big gun that we use for this is, of course, Entrust. I don't like to use Entrust if I don't have to. Now, if I have to, I don't want to lose a crop, so in lieu of losing a crop, I would use these type of products, the spinosad products. But if I didn't have to use the Entrust, I wouldn't. And the reason is it's so hard on beneficials and predators. Oftentimes we use the Entrust, and then we end up having problems with mites or something else later on. So you want to be aware of that. He's talking about an organic cherry block here. Entrust is Omni approved. It is approved for organic, but it works really well, and so that's what you want to be aware of. It has kind of a broader spectrum of what it is that it kills. So be aware of what your beneficial population is out in your field before you do that. How do you get a good feathered tree in a tiny tree? Well, the way to do that is start out with a good tree. So buy a good tree from a good nursery. I talked about a few of those. Again, you find those trees in Good Fruit Grower. They'll sell you a good feathered tree. So insist on a good feathered tree from the nursery. If you can't do that, get as good a tree as you can from wherever you buy your tree, and then come up on that tree in the dormant, when you're in the dormant season, about hip level or 32 inches, and cut that tree off. And when you do that, it will grow the leader, but it will also send out nice feathers. In a commercial setting, I hate doing that. I hate heading trees. I like to get a good feathered tree from the start where I don't have to head it, because I just want to keep that tree growing. But if you don't have the luxury of a real nice tree, or if you're a backyard grower and you want to start out with a nice feathered tree, I would cut that tree off at 32 inches, and it'll give you some real nice, beautiful breaks, and that central leader will continue to grow. So that's my best advice on that. Which type of calcium can we apply through the drip? What is the calcium that I am applying through the drip? Oh, my goodness. I use more leaf calcium through the foliar. There's a lot of good spray calcium products. I'm going to get back to you on that. I do have very specific calcium that I like to use through the drip. It's very expensive. There are a lot of good products out there. Even gypsum, if you can get your hands on some gypsum, that's very cheap. You can buy cheap gypsum if you can dissolve that. But there are some good calcium products out there too. I've got a good. I'm going to get back to you the name on that. I'm drawing a blank on it right now. What material do we spray for thinning at petal fall? What rate? Well, I don't give rates on this channel. I do have an applicator's license, but I'm not comfortable giving out recommendations. Even in our own fields, I don't write recommendations. We have people that come in and do those. I think I do have a good grasp of it, although there are probably people on this channel that are a lot better at entomology than I am, and petal fall sprays. I will say I got a good deal of experience on chemical thinning and petal fall spray thinning. The material that you use is called Carbaryl, Carbaryl or 7, and there's different rates that you can use on those. The other product you can use is just during blossom time, during the flower period, just lime sulfur, regular old lime sulfur. In our organic blocks, we don't have the benefit of Carbaryl. We only have the benefit of lime sulfur, and oftentimes we get better results out of those than we do the conventional blocks. So lime sulfur on its own, if you keep after them and you do 2 or 3 applications, you can get a good job with lime sulfur. But the spray that you're specifically asking about at Petal Fall uh, is Carbaryl. We would typically use Carbaryl and NAA, and yeah, that's called the Petal Fall spray, or the 7 spray. The other name for that would be 7. Vikrant Chahon, I think this is our last question. When to girdle? Which part of the year? We have to girdle. We have to girdle at some point or a different area. Well, when to girdle? You want to girdle sometime in the dormant period. I like to girdle in our area really from March up until the bloom period. It used to be that I only girdled at bloom timing, but I'm finding you can do it earlier than that if you got a lot of ground to cover. Bloom timing is probably the best time to girdle. I don't like to do it, much later than that when it starts warming up, or if you're going to have rainy weather, I don't like to do it. But I'm going to say bloom timing is the best time to do the girdling. So some new questions came in here. Zinui Hu, sorry about that. How different are the first fruit set from future years? Are they a little smaller or weaker the first year? That first, second, third year, those buds, that fruit set, those are real strong young buds. And those are going to be your strongest, nicest, biggest apples. The fact of the matter is, sometimes those young trees, we have to get out 5, 6, 7 years for those trees to settle down. And the fruit size becomes not so great, right? Becomes a more reasonable sized apple. So I really think, the optimum year is probably year 6, 7, 8, and even beyond that. But those early years, those first buds, those are real strong buds. The key is later on, in third, fourth, fifth year, being sure to work out old buds so that you always have new buds coming in, new spurs coming in. So as you're pruning, you want to bear that in mind that, yeah, those early years, those early spurs, those early buds, those were strong buds and they gave us nice, beautiful fruit. Well, you want to retain that throughout the life of the tree. And the way that you do that is through proper pruning and making sure that you're always leaving resting spurs. You have fruiting spurs and resting spurs every year, and you alternate those. So, good question. Terry Plant says, I have one of the Fuji apple trees that young. I'm thinking of putting it on a wire because of the branching already on it. How wide should I anticipate on building a system for it? Yeah, that's a great question. I think in our commercial orchards, we put those poles 40 feet apart. We use 12 gauge wire, and the wires go every 18 inches. So come up off the ground 18 inches. That's where the first wire goes. That's the drip line wire, right? And then every 18 inches after that, you would put another wire. 7 wires is good, even 6 wires. My little backyard over here, I think I only have 5 or 6 wires. My backyard, I have them a lot closer together. I have a pole put 20 feet apart. But realistically, on a commercial setting, you can get away with putting those trees 40 feet apart. You just want to make sure you have a good anchor on each end. And I always like to put what I call a grapple in the center of the wire, so you can go. It's kind of a little ratchet that you can put on the wire, and I like to put it right in the middle. It's called a grappiner, or grapple. What is that thing called? Anyway, you just got a little ratchet tool, and you can just ratchet it and tighten the wire up every year. Very important that you keep those wires straight. But that's what I would do. Put those poles about 20 feet apart. Make sure and put an anchor on every end, and then come up 18 inches and put your first wire, and then every 18 inches after that, put a wire. That's how I do that, Terry. Andy Riley says, timing for retain to increased fruit set. We are at King Bloom now. Spray now or wait till full bloom? We are at King Bloom. Spray now or wait till full bloom? Um, I think you could. I think you could spray anytime, Randy. I think you could go anytime. Timing for retain to increase fruit set. Yeah, we used to do that a lot. We used to do retain, and I used to like to use Edifon or Ethrol. It was a great product for getting that return. There's a lot of markets out there now that don't like those products. So the last couple of years we're having to relearn how to farm without those. But yeah, Retain and Edifon, Ethrol have both been great products around this timing. I would say from King Bloom all the way up to full bloom. Any time in that timing is a good time to go ahead and get that on. Probably more importantly, you have good temperatures. So take your pick. But yeah, that's a good product to get return bloom for next year along with Edifon. Is that all we have? Oh, one more. Here we go. Mitch Songa, do you have a deal with spotted winged Drosophila on cherries in Washington? And if so, how many sprays do you have to use for good control? We do have the issue of spotted winged Drosophila here in Washington State. It's only been on our radar for, gosh, I'm going to say about the last 10 years that it's been an issue for us, but it is an issue for us. How many sprays? I think that we probably do, I'm going to say offhand, probably 3 sprays for spotted winged Drosophila, and I think we put our first one on just last week. So yeah, um, it is an issue for us, along with fruit fly sprays. They're going to start coming up here pretty soon. Yeah, we're going to be picking cherries here in the next 3 weeks. So I think this week we'll get our jibs on. So about that straw color phase, you want to go out there and get that jib on there, and that'll keep that cherry firm. And as you get that jib on, you want to be real careful that you don't have any rainy weather coming. So if you look out and you see rain coming, and you're thinking about putting that jib on, I would wait because it'll have a tendency to split that cherry wide open. So yeah, we're going to start jibs this week. Mark says, do you have a better walk? Returning, oh, better luck. Returning bloom with retain or Promlin. I'm going to say I have better luck getting return bloom with Edifon, but between retain and Promlin, I have better luck with retain. Problem is, retain is just getting so expensive. We're just really having to weigh some of the cost of these products with the benefit that we get out of them. So, but I have had real good luck with retain, Mark. And with Evercrisp, I'm jealous. You guys have Evercrisp. That is one apple that we don't have here in Washington State. There may be some here and there, but at least for me, I don't have any Evercrisp. And I've admired this apple from some of your guys' Facebook pages, I think including even yours and some other guys back in Michigan and Minnesota. Looks like a wonderful apple. Reminds me of a Cosmic Crisp a little bit. I could be off on that, but we don't have any Evercrisp. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that apple, Mark. So I think that's all I have. So yeah, that's all I have. I'm gonna get out in the orchard this week and have a look around. Please look into that school, SKOOL. If you want to get the larger lessons, or if you don't like the little clips that we do that are very popular, by the way, you want to get the full lesson instead of a lot of little clips, you can go to that school. Also, we're beginning to build a library or catalog in there, so that if you want to ask about alternate bearing, there'll be a category in there with videos and commentary on that. If you want to talk about retain, we'll have a category in there where we'll talk about products that we use for return bloom or irrigation or tree training, whatever it happens to be. You're going to find that in that school. It doesn't cost anything. It's free. Just thanks to Marlon for making that available to us and putting the time into it to make that a thing. That's the library that I intend to leave behind when I retire here in the next year or 2 or 3 or as long as I'm still having fun. I'm going to keep farming, but I'm sure that's out there somewhere. With all that, that's all that I have. It's nice having you on board tonight. I appreciate you being a part of the Tree Fruit Growers Collective. It's been fun, and looking forward to another week of farming. Thanks.